As we head through the day, looks like the showers will become few and further between. So increasing amounts of sunshine, some eastern areas staying dry altogether. Temperature-wise, 11 to 14, maybe 15 degrees in the warmest spots. But it's set to get a lot milder for Thursday and for Friday, both by day and by night. But it will often be cloudy and very windy.
People are travelling again, heading back out on the road and rediscovering their wanderlust.
Exploring new destinations and cultures, making fresh friends and creating memories that will last a lifetime.
That's why at the Travel Show, we're expanding our horizons too. And wherever we go,
we want you to come with us. Now that might make for an awful lot of excess baggage, but we think you're worth it.
The Travel Show. Watch now on BBC iPlayer.
Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News Live from Washington. It's election night in America. $16 billion invested in a vote that will shape the final 2 years of Joe Biden's time in office. At stake, control of the House, the Senate. They will vote for governors and legislators across the country. Democracy itself is on the ballot. Tonight, from Washington, we'll bring you the results as they come in from East Coast to West Coast, a verdict that will have a huge bearing on 2024. Tonight, with The Context, the BBC's Catty Kay, Republican strategist and former RNC Communications Director Doug High, and Stephanie Brown. James, co-founder of the collective PAC that campaigns for equal representation in American politics. Hello and welcome to the programme. So here we are, Election Day 2022, post-pandemic, post-January 6th, the first real test of American democracy since that bitterly disputed election 2 years ago. The polls on the East Coast will start closing in 2 hours' time. I hope you will join Cathy and I for our special programme through the night as we try to make sense of it all. These midterms don't always attract the same attention as a presidential election, but early voting broke all records, and it does feel more important. There are election deniers on the ballot, candidates refusing to say whether they will accept the result. And it will set the stage for 2024. If Democrats lose control of the House or the Senate tonight, Joe Biden's agenda will certainly stall. In the end, it will come down to turnout. It always does. And last night, the two sides were making their final appeal.
Today, we face an inflection point, one of those moments comes around every 3 or 4 generations. We know in our bones that our democracy is at risk, and we know that this is your moment to defend it, preserve it, protect it, choose it.
Tomorrow you have to crush the communists, because that's what they are at the ballot box. For 6 straight years, the witch hunts, hoaxes, and abuses have been coming fast and furious. They are abuses and they are hoaxes.
So let's take a look then where we're at. We've swept the board for you. All these 435 seats in the House are now in play, and a third of the Senate seats, 35 seats in total. And remember, Republicans in this country are in red and Democrats are in blue. But let's go back and just have a look how we were before this election. We'll start with the House. You see that the Democrats have a majority. Republicans need a net gain of 5 seats tonight to take control of the House. And it's just as tight, in fact, in the Senate. Remember, there are 2 independents who vote with the Democrats, and then the Vice President Kamala Harris breaks the tie. In the Senate, in the upper house, the Republicans need a net gain of just 1. Let me show you how the Electoral College finished in 2020. And in light blue here are the key battleground states. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona. In each of these states tonight, there is a governor that is up for election. And with the exception of Michigan, there is a Senate seat up for grabs as well. Across this map, they have spent over $16 billion on these races. OK, so I told you that the race was coming in east to west. That's where they'll start voting, first of all, where they started voting this morning. And as those polls close, we'll be looking at one state in particular for some signs of this expected red wave, particularly in the House seats. And in Virginia, there are House districts, 3 House districts, where women took control, Democrats, in 2018 to give Democrats control of the House. So we'll be looking, for instance, at Virginia 2nd, which Joe Biden won by 2 points in 2020. Elaine Luria, incidentally, sits on the January 6th committee, so someone with a national profile. If Republicans take that, they're having an OK night. If they take this one, Virginia 7th, Abigail Spanberger's seat, which he won by 8 points, Joe Biden, in 2020, they're having a really good night. If they take Jennifer Wexton's seat in Virginia 10, which Biden won by 10 points in 2020, then Doug High is already on the way to the pub because Republicans are having a blowout. Now, why are we so focused on Pennsylvania? Well, the simple truth is that in Pennsylvania, the Senate seat is crucially important to Democrats. The polls to say if they take the Senate seat, if they flip it from red to blue, their chances of holding the Senate tonight are at 70%. If they don't win it, if John Fetterman does not beat Dr. Mehmet Oz tonight, their chances are down at 17%. So we're looking really closely at Pittsburgh. We're looking at Bucks County, which is the swingiest of swing districts in Pennsylvania. And of course, we are looking at Philadelphia, where our correspondent John Sudworth will be standing by for us. So, John, what are you looking out for? What have you heard through the day?
Well, first of all, Christian, I should tell you where I am. We are in Magillan's old ale house. Believe it or not, this building dates from 1860, the year, of course, of President Lincoln's historic victory, the eve of the American Civil War, an event that is being referenced today with some hyperbole, perhaps, but nonetheless it's being referenced amid another very divided political landscape. And as you say, this is a key state. It's the Senate race that everybody is watching, that race between Mehmet Oz, this celebrity slick TV doctor, and John Fetterman, his Democrat opponent, a man who's been living out a kind of public health crisis during this campaign, having suffered a stroke earlier this year. But make no mistake about it, this really is a knife-edge race. The polls have been neck and neck right up to the eve of polling, and all of the fault line issues front and centre of this campaign, including, of course, election denialism. John Fetterman telling his supporters that democracy is at stake and they need to come out and protect it by voting for him. Interestingly, with Mehmet Oz, a Trump-backed candidate who himself has at least flirted with questions over the legitimacy of 2020, he appears to have been distancing himself a little bit from that conspiracy in recent days. And as he turned up to vote today, talking to reporters, he appeared to be trying to appeal across the partisan divide.
Pennsylvania is sending a very clear message to Washington. We want less radicalism and more balance. So I encourage everyone to vote. It's your duty. Mr. Oswald.
John, the difference between Joe Biden and Donald Trump in 2020 was 80,000 votes in Pennsylvania, and we had to wait until the Saturday to get a final result. So every vote counts, and already there's been a court challenge in Pennsylvania. Tell us about that.
Yeah, very interesting issue here. Again, right up to polling itself and counting. The issue in question is about signed mail-in ballots. When voters send in those mail-in ballots, they not only have to sign them, they have to date it. Republicans have taken that issue to court, basically arguing that where ballots are either misdated or undated, they should be rejected. Democrats have been arguing against it. It's now been taken to federal court to challenge a decision that they should be thrown out. And this is more than just a technicality, of course, Christian, because mail-in ballots, we know historically, tend to skew Democrat. And it just shows you how tight this race is and how every single vote is being fought over.
John Sudworth in Philadelphia. We will talk lots through the course of the evening. Thank you very much for the moment. Doug High, a lot of these ballot papers that are being queried are for a missing date or a signature in the wrong place on the envelope. Yep. So it's not a problem with the ballot itself. And we know 69% of the early voting in Pennsylvania was Democratic. So is this ballot suppression or is it ballot security?
Well, you could argue it's both. It's reminiscent to me of 2000 Bush versus Gore in Miami and Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where we were looking at, is it a 4 for Gore or a 6 for Bush? And if you were just outside of the margin, out it goes. And so it's not surprising that we're
But
going
this is a date on the envelope. It's not on the ballot paper.
But ultimately, what Republicans are going to argue here is, were the processes, were the rules followed? And if not, then it shouldn't count. If it is, then it should count. And I mean, these rules are pretty simple to follow if you follow them.
The legislature in Pennsylvania could have cleared this up over the last 2 years. It's a Republican legislature. All the ballots were tipped in at 7 o'clock this morning. They have to open the envelope, they have to process the vote, and that's why it takes so long. And of course, we might see a Republican lead, and then we'll see the Democrats starting to edge up, and it adds to the confusion. Does that frustrate Democrats?
Absolutely. I think it frustrates all voters who just want a very clear process. It should not take so much to be able to go to the polls or do a mail-in ballot to exercise your right to vote. And listen, as you said, there could have been changes made years ago. However, there are some people who like confusion, because confusion can oftentimes have some voters want to stay away from the process because they don't want to be involved. And I think we are seeing a little bit of that here in Pennsylvania.
Cathy Kay, explain to people what American voters face when they go to the polls.
Well, I mean, first of all, let's hope it is safe, right? I mean, and we shouldn't have to be saying that, but my daughter, for example, is a poll worker today in Chicago. And I woke up this morning kind of thinking, oh, I hope they have some kind of security at that poll, because we know that election workers have been targeted. And you have to hope that this is going to be a safe, violence-free election. So this is a ballot. This is actually from Florida. I think we can see this. This is all of the pages and all of the different people that you are voting for on. So there's a first page. There's the governor and the Senate races. You all have know that. You may not know the Commissioner of Agriculture, right? You might not have done your research on that. Let's flip over to page 2. Hasn't finished yet. There is also, shall Justice Ricky Polston of the Supreme Court be retained in office? I hadn't really thought about that. And then there's the Cutler Key Community Development Commissioner, which I'm sure you've spent a lot of time researching, Christian. And then there's 2 more pages on different ballot measures. So this is 4 pages long. There are about, I haven't done the maths on it, but I reckon there are about 40 people that you're voting for. So it's not simple. It's not a simple process, either for the voter or for the election people who have to then process all of the ballots.
And while you're doing that, you better know the date. Which I have to check my phone for the date.
Your signature is in the right place.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Do the big sell for tonight. Lots of people around the world saying, why do I care about a midterm election?
So, look, I think there's 2 things at issue here. One, these midterm elections set up the race for 2024. We may not particularly want to think that we're talking about Donald Trump this early in the process, but he has inserted himself into the process as a potential candidate for the presidency. So, really, this is a lot about, is Donald Trump going to run for president? If Republicans have a good night tonight, it suggests he will run, and it makes it easier for him to make the case for re-electing me. So a lot of this is about 2024. I think it's also about, can America hold a violence-free election for the first time after the attacks of January the 6th on the Capitol that both sides accept? And there's the rub. Will the winners and the losers accept the result?
OK, there is lots to query in American politics, but I have to sound not too judgmental at the moment because there's an awful lot of chaos in UK politics as well. Let's bring you the breaking news from London. Rishi Sunak has had a resignation from his government, an early resignation. The man he appointed to be his minister without portfolio, Sir Gavin Williamson, resigned in the last hour. He had been under pressure over bullying allegations. Our political correspondent, Jonathan Blake, is standing by. What do we know, Jonathan?
A resignation tonight here in Westminster, as you say, Christian, from Sir Gavin Williamson, a cabinet minister with a roving brief across government, but had been facing several accusations over the last few days about his past conduct in previous roles. He served as Education Secretary, Defence Secretary, former Chief Whip for the Conservative Party in government in charge of parliamentary discipline. But tonight he has clearly taken the view that, as he said in his resignation letter to the Prime Minister, that he has decided to step back from government so he can comply fully with the complaints processes underway against him. And he said that the accusations were becoming a distraction for the good work that he said the government was doing.
It's never good to have a resignation as early as that. And of course, Rishi Sunak would have been hoping to show a different face to the Conservative Party. How damaging is this to the Prime Minister?
I don't think it's a good look for Rishi Sunak. Just a fortnight into his administration, he talked on the steps of Downing Street when he took office about governing with integrity, professionalism and accountability. And appointing Gavin Williamson as a cabinet minister had raised eyebrows across Westminster because he's someone who divides opinion. He comes with a fearsome reputation for some as a effective, even ruthless political operator, but something of a liability to others. And he's previously had to resign from his post as Defence Secretary after being accused of leaking details of a deal between the UK and the Chinese company Huawei. He also was ousted as Education Secretary after a tumultuous time during the pandemic over A-level and GCSE results in England. And now all of this. And the accusations against him were serious. He was said to have told a senior official at the Ministry of Defence to, quote, slit your throat and jump out of the window on separate occasions. He was also said to have sent text messages to the former Chief Whip, Wendy Morton, accusing her of rigging the process of allocating seats for MPs at the Queen's funeral here earlier this year, and using abusive language and potentially threatening phrases towards her. So all of that taken together, as well as further accusations coming to light here this evening, have meant that the pressure on Sir Gavin Williamson to resign has become too great to bear. He does relieve a bit of the pressure on Rishi Sunak, but still it looks like to many as an error of judgment for appointing him in the first place.
Jonathan Blake in London, thank you very much for that. Doug Howell, you were saying to me that you were supposed to go to London recently. You're a communications... Twice. What happened?
Various events in London that basically said, we can't have you right now.
Because we don't have a Prime Minister.
Well, because there wasn't a Prime Minister, and also just these cause political people to work and to be too busy. So with the Queen's death, all of London, all of the UK essentially stopped for several days. And if you're going for business and you lose 2 days in a week, you better reschedule.
OK, let's return to events here. According to the BBC's researchers, of 596 Republicans running for statewide or federal office, 307 have raised doubts about the validity or the integrity of the 2020 election. That leads to intimidation at polling stations, as Caddy was saying. According to San Francisco police, it breeds the sort of hatred that led to last week's violent attack on the House Speaker's husband, Paul Pelosi. An 82-year-old man attacked in his own home with a hammer. Nancy Pelosi has been speaking to CNN's Anderson Cooper.
Well, you would think that there would be some level of responsibility. But you see what the reaction is on the other side to this, to make a joke of it, and really that is traumatizing too. But nonetheless, forgetting them, there has to be some healing process. In our democracy, there is one party that is doubting the outcome of the election, feeding that flame, and mocking any violence that happens. That has to stop.
It has to stop, says Nancy Pelosi. But is the Republican Party listening? Not on the evidence of the closing arguments last night from Donald Trump in Dayton, Ohio.
Nancy Pelosi said, please don't call them animals, they're human beings. I said, no, they're animals. Of course, I think she's an animal, too. You want to know the truth? They'll say, oh, what a horrible thing he said about Nancy. She impeached me twice for nothing.
And on stage last night, Trump endorsed Carrie Lake, who is running for governor in Arizona.
I'm worried about tomorrow. Who's worried about tomorrow? And these bastards back there don't want us talking about stolen elections. Well, it doesn't matter what they attempt tomorrow because we're going to show up like our lives depend on it.
Doug Howell, you wrote a piece for the Washington Post last week, which I read. Brave piece, might I say.
Thank you.
Because there aren't many Republicans who are saying this needs to stop, and I was a part of it. But in the early days, the attacks on Nancy Pelosi, you were a communications director in the House, and you want to share some of the responsibility?
Well, I think, what we did in 2010, and you're seeing similar movement right now, is what we called the Fire Pelosi campaign. And we launched it on the night that the Obamacare bill passed the House. So because Nancy Pelosi was effective is why we launched this campaign. If she weren't as effective, Republicans wouldn't care about her. And I was talking to some colleagues just, a few days before about the old banner that we hung. Katty, you'll remember we hung the banner over the RNC building and say, oh, what happened to that? And then when the attack came, it's like, well, wait a second. We should maybe step back and rethink kind of some of the language we use. I don't think that, Fire Pelosi in 2010 directly led to what happened to Paul Pelosi any more than perhaps what Chuck Schumer said about Brett Kavanaugh led to people or somebody being arrested with a gun in front of Kavanaugh's house. But clearly the rhetoric is out of control, and most of it not only comes from my side, not all of it, but most of it, but also is being spurred on by the person who gets the most media attention in the world, which is Donald Trump, which ultimately resulted in January 6th. And my Republican friends will say, rightly, what about Steve Scalise, who got shot, and Kavanaugh, and on and on? Good points. But clearly, we're pushing this further, and I knew what the reaction was going to be when all you had to hear was sure, but and support from Republicans, mostly private, but some public. But ultimately, when Paul Pelosi was attacked, all I had to know was his last name to know that some people were going to say stupid and inflammatory things, and Lord, they did.
Yeah, that's what it's going to take, though. It's going to take Republicans to stand up to this, and there are too many Republicans who spoke out about January the 6th who then sat on their hands.
Absolutely. And, it goes past rhetoric to the point where people are saying this inflammatory, derogatory language. For Kari Lake to say bastards, for Donald Trump to call people animals is completely inappropriate. And it has definitely gone too far. And this is no longer a partisan issue. This is a human rights issue that we're having at this moment, where we can't have a civil discourse about issues that impact all Americans. And I do think it's going to take many Republicans saying in public, this is no longer acceptable for the Republican Party, nor is it acceptable for the American people.
And when a former newscaster like Kari Lake is saying it about the press, that tells you about the incentive structure that we have politically right now and how it's completely upside down.
Yeah. We can take that. We can take it. But it is interesting that she doesn't seem to have any perception of how the news media works.
She has a lot of perception.
Well, she does, but I mean, she knows. I mean, you interviewed her? Do you honestly believe that she believes the election?
I went into the interview with her asking that exact same question. Does she really believe it? There is nothing I could push her on, and I pushed her on all the lawsuits that are being thrown out. I pushed her on the Republican Party's own review in Arizona that showed that there had been no fraud. And everything you raise, her answer is just, well, we have evidence. The evidence has not been produced, but her answer is, we have evidence of fraud. And in a way, it doesn't really matter. Yes, it might be a cynical tactic on her part. It doesn't really matter whether she believes it or not. It doesn't really matter whether Donald Trump believes it or not, because by now it is out there in the system and it cannot be recalled. Because millions of Americans believe it and are acting on that.
And are not demanding to see the actual results, to actually say, okay, what is the evidence that you have? And I think the American people need to demand that. And I think we need to have more Republicans saying these are the actual pieces of evidence that we're saying that led to fraud, and we're not seeing that.
Well, Donald Trump will be watching results come in tonight at an election party he's holding at Mar-a-Lago. Today, he was voting in Palm Beach, Florida. And last night in Dayton, Ohio, he all but confirmed he will be running again in 2024.
I'm going to be making a very big announcement on Tuesday, November 15th at Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach, Florida.
Which is Tuesday next week. If he declares on Tuesday, Stephanie, does that force Joe Biden to make an early decision?
I think it forces Ron DeSantis to make an early decision. I think that's going to be more of a
Florida.
Yes, the governor of Florida, who is right now really the only person who is kind of standing there as a potential, contender for the Republican nomination in such a strong way as Donald Trump would. I mean, I think it is definitely going to be telling what happens today. So I think it's a bit presumptuous for Donald Trump to say he has this big announcement next Tuesday that may be him saying he's going to run for president. But at the end of the day, Joe Biden has to continue to make the appeal to the American people of what he is doing for them, what the White House is doing for them, to ease the pains that folks are having every single day. And I think he needs to stay focused on that message and not so much on what Donald Trump is going to do.
Does anybody want this sequel? Really? I mean, 12 days after this election, Joe Biden turns 80. It's like the worst sequel of Cocoon. OK? I mean, nobody wants
Groundhog
this.
Day.
Right?
There are people queuing up to work in a second Trump administration.
Are they?
You might, yeah, absolutely. I've spoken to some of them. You may think, oh, well, Donald Trump comes back, so many people left his administration with a cloud hanging over them, or with huge lawsuits, or with amazing legal bills. But there are people, it is the White House, it is the President of the United States of America, it is the biggest economy in the world, the biggest military in the world. It is very hard to resist if you are interested in politics and you want power.
What did you make of the last... I mean, he did 4 rallies in 5 days. We know that a narcissist like Donald Trump always wants to make it about himself. But in Pennsylvania at the weekend, he was calling Ron DeSantis Ron DeSanctimonious. Ron DeSantis is on the ballot. He's on the ballot. And then over the next few days and hours, he then starts teasing that he's going to run. Is that helpful to the Republican cause tonight?
No, and look, this election had been largely Trump-free, and it's why it had shaped up so well for Republicans. They were focused on the economy, on crime, on the border.
On Biden.
Ultimately on Biden, and they weren't then pulled into the Trump thing over and over again, which they now find themselves at the last minute. And it says 2 things. One, that Donald Trump always wants the focus on him. We already know that.
He never likes it being Trump-free.
No, not at all.
That was not good.
Right, exactly.
No. And that if it is Trump-free and it's a big night for Republicans, that the parade could leave him by. And so he's inserted himself, and clearly he's nervous because he's now lashing out at people who aren't subservient enough to him, like DeSantis. So he clearly views DeSantis as a threat.
Was Joe Biden a drag on the Democrat ticket?
I don't think he was a drag. I think in some places there were candidates who weren't necessarily beating down the doors for Joe Biden to come to their city. But I think, again, the Democrats have to and should have done a much better job of leading on the economy, leading on what the solutions are that they have put out there to make the lives of everyday Americans better. We hear that across the country. Economy, inflation. And that is a message. Yes, democracy is on the ballot. Yes, and my wallet is hurting. And that's what Americans are focused on at the ballots. Now, I think, Democrats are still going to have a good night. I'm optimistic. But I think that we could have had a lot better messaging on our side this year.
And I'd add the issue of crime to that as well. The only reason we're talking about New York's governor's race is because of the issue of crime. And it certainly didn't help the incumbent that Lee Zeldin, the Republican running against her, was attacked on stage, that there was a drive-by shooting in front of his house. In North Carolina, the Senate race there is also crime as much as it is the economy. And it's things that voters are feeling are hearing about every day. And you don't have to be a victim of crime. Just go to a drugstore and have to push a button to get your shampoo, and you're reminded of shoplifting.
OK, well, we'll leave it there. We're going to go for a break. Katty Kay is off to present World News America very shortly. But then together...
we're doing something tonight,
We're doing
aren't we?
something together tonight. Yeah, I do hope you will join us for that. We will be here from, is it 11:15 GMT?
It's 11:15 GMT until way, way, way too late, past our bedtime.
Yeah.
The worst Strictly Come Dancing ever.
We might dance at the end. I don't know. We'll see. We'll tease them. Maybe they'll tune in more if we dance. OK, stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hello there. Ultimately, Wednesday is going to be another day of sunny spells and scattered showers, but with lighter winds than Tuesday. Hopefully the showers not as widespread and not as heavy. So we will start off with a band of more persistent showery rain across southeast England. Wind directions change somewhat to more of a westerly, so most of the showers to begin with along west-facing coast. That rain will ease away from the southeast, sunshine come through, and as we go through the afternoon, we'll see more widespread showers developing to the northwest of the Great Glen. Here it'll still be quite breezy, but on the whole, lighter winds in comparison to the last few days. Fewer showers, particularly into the afternoon, and temperatures not bad for this time of year. Highs between 11 and 15 Celsius. Now, there's going to be an area of high pressure that will drift across Europe as we move into Thursday. So this high here, and it's going to keep the weather story across England and Wales quite dry and settled. It'll deflect the weather fronts up into the far northwest. Here it stays wet and windy, but we tap into that very warm air coming all the way up from Africa. So for this time of year, temperatures are going to be very, very mild indeed. Does come at a price, though, in November. That southwesterly wind bringing a lot of low cloud. It'll be murky, it'll be drizzly on exposed coast. It'll be very windy as well. The heaviest of the rain in the far north, gusts in excess of 50 to 60 miles an hour at times, but mild with it. We're looking at around 13 degrees in the Northern Isles, 17 degrees down in the south. And it's not only just mild by day, but also potentially through the night. Now, these are the current record November minimum as they stand. You can see mid-teens quite widely. But as we move into the early hours of Friday morning, potentially in Northern Ireland and in Scotland, we might break those records. It's going to be an incredibly mild start to the day. Still be wet and windy at times in the far northwest. Still a lot of low cloud, drizzly, murky conditions on exposed west coast. The best of the sunshine through England and Wales. And again, high still possible of 17 degrees, 63 Fahrenheit. Now, as we move into the weekend, hopefully the showers will stay away. That high pressure continues to dominate. It'll be a better weekend than the one just passed, and it stays pretty mild.
There were two peas in a pod.
It really is not too much to say that those two people changed the world.
And this is just the beginning. We need a war on dementia. This is how we create some noise. We will beat dementia!
The consequences of what they've done are just unimaginable.
The scientific data is inconclusive.
They lie. Press red to watch now on BBC iPlayer.
Morning. Come and have a seat. Now, of course, I'm not going to go easy on you. There are some really big questions we've got to try and get answers to this morning. But I'll be fair, and we just want to hear what you've got to say. So, shall we get on with it?
We're rolling.
Here we go. Join me to hear from the biggest names inside and outside politics.
Sunday with Laura Koonsberg. Sundays at 9 on BBC One and iPlayer.
You experienced racism. Why didn't you walk away?
That's a really good question.
You're a politician. You read the polls.
I'm not a politician. I don't read the polls.
Yeah, you
I
are
sit
a
in Judiciary
politician.
Committee. No,
you are very definitely a politician.
No.
The very fact that there were not people who looked like you.
Hold on. I'm only halfway through my answer.
Is secret schooling happening across Afghanistan for girls?
It does.
You simply can't assume that.
Actually, yes, you can.
Hard Talk. Watch on BBC iPlayer.
You need to look into your camera. Hello, I'm Christian Fraser. You're watching The Context on BBC News, live from Washington. A single ticket won the record Powerball lottery in the United States last night, $2 billion, the largest jackpot in American history. But who will be the big winners tonight? We will get the view of Frank Luntz, the star pollster who has been talking to voting panels across America. And we'll be going to New Hampshire, one of the few states in America that does not have a tradition of early voting. Tonight, with The Context, the Republican strategist and former RNC Communications Director Doug Heye, and Stephanie Brown-James, co-founder of the Collective PAC, which campaigns for equal representation in US politics. Welcome back. Well, you can probably tell that none of us had the winning ticket because we wouldn't be sat here if we had. Tonight, however, it is the pollsters who will be on tenterhooks, hoping, praying that they got the numbers right. According to most of them, it is the Republicans that finished the campaign the stronger, with a good chance of taking back the House, though only slightly favoured at this point to take the Senate. This is the data we can bring you from polling site 538. And as you can see, the predictions for the Senate shifted around these last 3 months. Through the summer, after the Supreme Court's decision to roll back abortion rights, the national environment did improve for Democrats, but Republicans regaining much of that ground in October, in line with the usual trends that we see in midterm elections, and in line with what people were saying, Doug. A lot of people focused on inflation. that's the big issue. It's the economy stupid.
It's the number one issue. And obviously, Republicans were scared and apoplectically scared after the Dobbs decision. We saw a surge of Democratic enthusiasm, also a real surge in registration. And it's why some of these races that might be close that Republicans don't win will be due to that. But they're still poised for a good night because they've been laser focused on talking about the economy, on talking about crime, and those issues that voters are saying every day that they care about. So when Biden the other day, just a mile and a half from here, gave his speech on American democracy, essentially what he was saying is, here's what you should be concerned about. When voters are saying, here's what we are concerned about, and those were different things.
Yeah, I mean, the polling suggests that American voters are concerned about democracy, but they don't vote on democracy. They vote on their pocketbook. And we heard from Gavin Newsom, the governor in California, that Democrats are getting crushed on the message. Did the White House get that wrong?
Well, part of it is, Democrats love to be forward-thinking and forward-looking, and, we think about the future. People are living in the present. And if we're not addressing the issues that people are facing every single day, yeah, it's going to be a challenge with not just communications, but what actually galvanizes folks to the polls. And people are thinking about their pocketbooks. They're thinking about their gas tanks. So definitely, I think that there should have been a stronger message. But also, I just want to be very clear, the entire world has inflation, out of control. So this is not just an American problem, but it is one that we needed to have much better messaging on and talking directly to the voters.
Can we talk about what else is on the ballot tonight? Because we talked about governors, we talked about the secretaries of state who are in charge of the ballot. They're up for election tonight as well in some key states. Also there, though, is the issue of abortion. Voters being asked the question about abortion in 5 states tonight. 3 states trying to put abortion rights into the Constitution, 2 Republican states trying to ban it entirely. What do you think we're going to see from that?
I think we're going to see a lot of women turning out to vote on this issue. I think it has definitely galvanized women voters. I think it continues to be one of the most hallmark issues of this midterm elections. Yes, the economy is number 1. I think abortion rights is number 2 for a lot of people. And so I think we're going to see those differences play out in the elections today. But also, as Democrats have been saying, they want to win control of Congress so that they can codify Roe. And so that is what is hanging in the balance of what happens tonight is what happens in the bigger term of what Congress does if Democrats have control.
A lot of people around the world, when we did some of our audience research ahead of the midterms, they're focused on Ukraine. They're focused on the state of US democracy. They're also focused on abortion because people look to America. If Democrats lose the House tonight and the Senate, are we likely to see a federal ban in America?
I think it's quite possible. And the issue of abortion is actually a terribly complicated one in America because most voters like Roe versus Wade, and they wanted to keep that in place. But they also want certain restrictions on abortion. And so trying to weed that out is very difficult. And so often in this campaign, we've talked about something that is on the ballot, even though it may not actually be physically on the ballot. Abortion is in some states, and we may see an uptick in certainly younger voters and more women voters.
And we saw the backlash in Kansas in August.
Absolutely.
That was on the ballot. They wanted to ban it, and they put it to the voters, and it was overwhelmingly against.
But we also see in some of the blue states where the states have codified their own protections on abortion that it's less important of an issue existentially for voters because they sort of feel that, well, the state's taking care of this, and they're even more than focused on crime and the economy and inflation than they would be otherwise. So it's a bit bizarre that in blue states it's not as big of an issue because the states have put in these protections.
Do you think people tonight are voting on abortion in some of these blue states, though?
Well, I'm in Ohio. I live in Ohio, from Ohio. And I can tell you, I voted yesterday, and it was a conversation topic in the line, and it was a long line, which is a good sign for early voting. But it was an issue because Ohio was one of those states that is really kind of purple. And, when restrictions were put in place by the state legislature, it actually motivated people to say, I have to turn out and vote, because if this becomes permanent, we are in a world of trouble. And so I think it's been a real galvanizing piece for a lot of voters.
Just very quickly, Lindsey Graham has sponsored a bill that would introduce a federal ban on abortion. If that was to be passed by a Republican-controlled House and a Republican-controlled Senate, presumably that would be vetoed by the president.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. So welcome to politics.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay. So certainly for the next 2 years, we're not likely to see that ban. But if the White House, I mean, that could be an issue in 2024.
Sure.
Absolutely will.
Yeah, interesting. All right, well, an estimated 44 million Americans cast their votes before Election Day, and that, we're told, is a midterm record. But next to no early voting, in the granite state of New Hampshire, polls opened at 11 this morning. You can register and vote on Election Day in New Hampshire, so you can imagine there is this mad scramble to get everyone to the polls. Both teams will ship in extra helpers from other states. In fact, a Democrat told me last night that one year they brought in Bon Jovi to drive the buses. So anything to get out the vote. Let's speak then to Kevin Landrigan. He's political reporter for the New Hampshire Union Leader newspaper. A warm welcome to the programme. So a very busy day in New Hampshire. Why is it so tight there, particularly in the Senate race? We've got Maggie Hassan, the incumbent Democrat, versus General Donald Bolduc. Who's going to win it?
Yeah, it's a very close race, Christian. It'll be interesting to see tonight how late the election will go, as you point out, because we have no early voting. When we have a very limited absentee ballot voting, you have to sign an affidavit and have a legitimate reason to cast an absentee ballot, or you can't get one. Only about 10% vote by absentee in New Hampshire. So the count could go late because this race seems very competitive, and it has been in the last couple of weeks, as your panel has talked about here. Republicans have come home to Don Bolduc, the Republican nominee, who the Washington Republican elite thought was just too conservative and had made too many gaffes in this campaign in order to compete against a seasoned incumbent like Maggie Hassan. But Republicans have come back to him. Inflation is a dominant issue. He's run a very retail-style campaign, which New Hampshire likes. He's had 83 town hall meetings. Maggie Hassan, the incumbent, has ran very much of an incumbent, kind of not a rope-a-dope, but very careful, cautious campaign, not having town halls, just having a lot of Zoom conferences, even after the pandemic started to wane. And the challenger has taken advantage of that and essentially tried to cast her as someone who just isn't listening to the struggling families in New Hampshire.
You talk to me about this aggressive voter push that there is in New Hampshire on polling day. Does it feel like that? Does it feel as if the two sides are trying to hoover up voters, anyone and anybody that could go to the polls?
Yeah, Christine, it's in a midterm election in New Hampshire, the vote falls off about 30% from a presidential year. So you're dealing with a lot more informed and engaged electorate already. So the get out the vote effort in a midterm is less intense than it is in a presidential year. And what really happened for Hassan in this race, and was unfortunate for her, was the Republicans nominated the candidate the National Democrats wanted, Don Bolduc. They spent $3 million in TV advertising actually promoting him in order that he win the primary. Once he won that primary, this race came off the national radar, even for the Democratic Party. They essentially said to Maggie Hassan, you don't need us. You've raised $40 million on your own, which is a record, by the way, in New Hampshire. So we're going to turn our attention where the races are much tighter, such as Ohio, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, even Colorado, Nevada. So Hassan had difficulty getting national attention and actual national ground troops to come to the state of New Hampshire to help her in these last couple of weeks. We'll see whether that will help cost her the seat, because it would be quite a historic upset. This is someone who in 2016 became only the second woman in American history to both be elected a U.S. senator and a governor. She's a statewide commodity. She's very well liked here. But the times are tough, and that's when incumbents sometimes, even with a lot of money and a popular incumbent, they can lose.
Let me get some reaction to that, Kevin. Stay there. Stephanie, this would be hugely embarrassing for Democrats, because if they lose this to Don Bolduc, a man that they have elevated, people will point at the Senate campaign and say, you know, this is hugely hypocritical. You talk about election deniers, but you're elevating someone who was an election denier, thinking you could beat him. You spent Democrat campaign money on it, donations from Democrats, and now look what's happened. I mean, it would be a terrible look for the Democrats.
Well, unfortunately, this is a strategy that many of us in the ecosystem were quite upset about, that so much resources were going into candidates on the Republican side so that they could win a primary, because we thought there's no way in the world that voters in the state would vote for these candidates. And in some of these places, hopefully we won't see that backfire. But as you said at the very beginning, Christian, it is a turnout game. It is who is able to turn out their voters to the polls, and that's exactly what we're going to see in New Hampshire and across the country for sure.
I also said at the top, Doug, that this has implications for 2024, and it really does, because were they to lose this Senate seat, what I read is that Democrats will think, well, this is a predominantly white electorate. It's a suburban electorate. It's not really in the Democratic sweet spot. So you know what? We won't go to New Hampshire early in the election season for 2024. We'll go somewhere else.
Well, my guess is they'll have to go to New Hampshire, because it seems pretty clear that they're going to dump Iowa and the Iowa caucuses as the first in the nation contest. So they've sort of potentially have nowhere else to go. But it also affects 2024 in this way. If Don Bolduc wins, he'll be the incumbent senator from New Hampshire, and it's very clear who he'll endorse in the New Hampshire primaries on the Republican side, and that'll be Donald Trump.
Yeah, indeed so. Kevin, just a final quick word. Democrats bussing in loads of people. I was told that yesterday. They're going to bring people in from Massachusetts to hit the ground, get the vote out. Can you catch up in New Hampshire, or is it too late?
Well, in a midterm election, it is very difficult to do that, because you're talking to an electorate who actually votes every 2 years. So they're more likely to vote whether you send both busloads up in the last couple of weeks to deal with them or not. I haven't seen a lot of evidence of those busloads, by the way, but it'll be interesting to see. I mean, to the point about New Hampshire, I think the panel makes a very good point about the New Hampshire presidential primary. This hurt Senator Hassan when the Democratic National Committee, in the middle of this midterm election, decided, we're not going to set the calendar until after the midterm election. That makes a one-term Democratic senator and former governor look very weak, who's trying to protect not only her seat, but also trying to protect the first in the nation primary.
Very interesting. Kevin Landrigan, we'll maybe speak to you some more when we get the result in from New Hampshire. Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts this evening. Now, it is time for the panel. Well, there's usually some music there. We'll put another 50p in the meter. Maybe we'll be able to find that. I don't know. Anyway, guys, what I want to do is what we did last night. I want you to pick out for me one race. I don't know which race you want to pick up, because it's your time. But tell me which race, Stephanie, you'll be looking at that will make the difference for you.
What makes a difference for me tonight is Wes Moore, who is running for governor of Maryland. He would become only the 4th black governor in the history of this country post-Reconstruction. So for me, I love to see history being made, and I think he's going to pull it out tonight. He is a Rhodes Scholar, a veteran. He's an author. He's been over a foundation. Oprah is his BFF. So I'm looking forward to seeing him win
Maryland's
this evening.
first black governor. The 117th Congress was the most diverse. There were 62, I think, black legislators in the 117th Congress on the Democratic side. After tonight, I mean, you're deeply involved in this. Will it be a step forward or a step backwards?
Definitely a step forward. We already see there's 11 black candidates who are the nominees for their parties running for U.S. Senate on the Republican and Democratic side. That's historic. We saw, as you mentioned, in 2018, actually, it was the first time we reached equity and representation of black people in Congress. And we've seen even more progress made in gubernatorial candidates. Chris Jones is running against Sarah Huckabee Sanders in Arkansas. I think that's going to be an interesting race to watch. And so progress is being made. Maybe not as fast as some people would like for it to be, but it's definitely progress this year.
Only 2 black members of the House on the Republican side.
Yeah, no, it's a real problem. Let me go one step further than you on Wes Moore. He's not going to sort of win. He's going to win. He's going to win overwhelmingly. I'll say he's a friend, so I'm slightly biased, but he's a terrific candidate. He'll be on the national radar screen immediately.
Afghan veteran.
Yeah, absolutely.
CEO of a non-profit against a guy that Donald Trump picked who's not a very good candidate. I mean, you've got a patriot versus someone who was busing people to January 6th and to the riot at the Capitol.
This is one of the situations where the Democratic strategy works, because the candidate was supposed to be Republican nominee Kelly Schultz, who was the Commerce Secretary, also, full disclosure, a friend. And that would have been one of these positive, issue-oriented campaigns that we hear about happening that never really do. And so once that primary was over, it was Westmore's in a way.
Yeah. Just pick up that point. I mean, black representation within the Republican Party, they say, I think tonight, if they have a good night, between 4 and 7, actually, which would be a step forward for the Republican Party. And it is badly needed.
Black representation, Hispanic representation, Asian American representation, and that builds off of what was a very good year last cycle for Republicans in picking up more women in the House of Representatives. We got a lot of work to do, but we're starting to make progress.
But I mean, Hispanic representation, that's where Republicans are making real inroads. I mean, we're looking at 3 seats tonight in the south of Texas along the Rio Grande Valley. We're looking at Miami-Dade, a lot of Venezuelans in Miami-Dade. I mean, we no longer look at Florida, in fact, as one of the battleground states. We were always hanging on for Florida. Now it's Pennsylvania.
Yeah, look, these maps move. And so I'm from North Carolina. I'm slightly biased there that it didn't get the attention that it deserves, because it will be a battleground in 2024 one way or another. We know that Pennsylvania will. And when you look at the map, there are more and more battlegrounds emerging, just as there are some receding.
Yeah.
And North Carolina is a state where we can have the first ever black woman senator from the state. Only, again, the 3rd black woman ever elected into the U.S. Senate. Like North Carolina, Ohio, my state, Tim Ryan and J.D. Vance are on the ballot. I mean, these are states that may no longer be considered battleground states, but the battle is raging in these states. And so it's important that they are never off of our radar.
It's an interesting point that we sometimes gloss over. All right, what's your race?
Look, I'm not going to give you a race. I'll give you a region, and it's the upper northwest, or no, upper northeast. We're talking about Connecticut, Rhode Island, and New York. This is where Republicans traditionally are not competitive, and they're looking at several pickups. And these are the races, especially Rhode Island and Connecticut, where you haven't had Republican representation in a couple of generations, that will tell you that it's going to be a big night. If they win in those seats, and you can throw in the Bolduc Senate race as well, it's going to be a very big night for Republican. If they don't, then Republicans can have a good night. It's just not going to be that complete grand slam.
This really brings us back to message, The Democrats have talked about abortion and democracy for a large part of the campaign, but how on earth is Kathy Hochul in New York looking for a first full term as governor? How is she in a competitive race in a state that Joe Biden won by 27 points?
Well, I think as Doug mentioned before, people are concerned about crime, but crime also goes hand in hand with the economy, with opportunities for jobs, with, making sure that people can afford to live their everyday lives. And those things go hand in hand. And if you look at New York and how expensive it is to live in this state, it is an issue of grave concern for a lot of people across the state. And I think that's why the race is competitive. Now, I think she's going to pull it out tonight, but I think it's going to be a wake-up call that, listen, if we don't directly address talk about these issues, because I think there has been some work done that the Democrats have done that have been very positive to address these issues. It's just you have to be able to communicate that message so people can understand it clearly and know that you are the party working for their best interest and not the other party.
Before we go tonight, I want to show you some pictures from Capitol Hill this morning. Clear skies ahead of the election. A total lunar eclipse. A blood moon. There won't be another one like this for 3 years. So, Doug, is that Republican red? Is that an omen of what is to come?
I'm just glad it's not a lightning bolt striking the top of the Capitol, to be honest with you. So if that's an omen, take it. If not, okay. I don't think the gods and the stars planned it that well in advance, though.
Okay. Answer me this question. Kevin McCarthy wants to be the new Speaker of the House, the Republican Speaker. He's got some fairly far right candidates now among the Republicans in the House. How many do you think he needs? What sort of majority does he need to be able to govern effectively?
I don't think it's a question of margin, really, whether he has a 10-seat majority or a 20-seat majority. That may be slightly paradoxical, but ultimately, Republicans are going to have difficulty moving on some of these big things that, whether you have the extra 10 votes or not, whether it's an appropriations bill that you're not getting these members on, or certainly as we get to government shutdowns and debt ceiling, you're going to have a tough time doing it. John Boehner had a tough job. Obviously, Paul Ryan did as well. It's a big job for a reason.
Yeah, but you've got someone on the far right, Marjorie Taylor Greene in Georgia, who'll probably be elected tonight. In fact, she's earned a lot of money through this election cycle, so there's plenty of supporters down there, whatever she might say on the national agenda. But I mean, does she pull the party further to the right? She says, you're going to have to give me some power, you're going to have to put me on a committee.
Sure, but she'll be one of a group. Back when Republicans took over the House in 2011, you had the Tea Party caucus, what they were called, the Tea Party Republicans, and some of them made it very clear. They would say specifically, I didn't come here to be a part of any team. Well, that non-team team is even bigger now, and we just don't know how big it will be, but it's going to be a challenge for Republicans moving forward.
Yeah, there is a hurricane coming the Democrats' way if the Republicans take the House tonight, investigations, possible impeachments. The Democrats ready for that?
Well, unfortunately, I don't think the American people are ready for it or want it, let alone the Democrats. People want progress. They want actual work to be done by our congressional leaders that we elect. And so I think, to go through, more years of just infighting and back and forth and there being no bipartisanship at all actually does a real disservice to Americans who want things to be better. And I don't think that they want this divisive nature like we've seen it. Although, as you said, there are more people who are part of this tent of we just want to do things our way and believe the country should be this one way and not a unified country.
Just 30 seconds left. What's a good result for Democrats tonight?
A good result is, definitely holding on to the Senate. I think we're going to do that. I'm hopeful. I have to be optimistic that I think we're going to hold on to the House as well. But I think we're going to have a good night, better than folks think.
51 Senate seats. If that's bigger, then it's a really big night. But if they get 51, that means Mitch McConnell's the majority leader. That's it.
Okay, we will leave it there. My thanks to my panel, Doug High and Stephanie Brown. James, lovely to have you with us tonight to discuss what is going to be a very interesting election. Caddy and I will be back through the night from 23:15 GMT, 11:15. Do join us for that. Thank you very much for watching.
Hello there. The relatively mild and unsettled theme is set to continue for the rest of this week. In